Welcome, everyone, to another session of the Choice Chats, where we honor those whose bold choice was made for a better tomorrow. I have here none other than my good friend Alberta Johnson. If you remember from a few chats ago, she was here with Nina, and now she gets to fly solo with me for another Choice Chat. And we dig deeper into Alberta's bold choice. Hi, Alberta.
Loren, I'm happy to be here. Love the choice chats and all of the interviews that you've done over the past couple of months. So just always interested in giving updates and hearing about what you're doing as well in this space. So happy to be here again.
Thank you. So, I want to dive deep into your journey. I know last time you kind of shared the stage, so I want you to share your journey with our audience.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and I'm actually glad that we had another chance to talk because probably, as you know, over the past few weeks, there's been this huge discussion about DE&I and what that's going to look like moving forward, and that's really how I started my career. And at the time when I started my career, DE&I was affirmative action and civil rights. It was still um, very much a kind of compliance measure, but it was evolving. And what I was seeing was it was going from a compliance measure to more of a focus on how we recruit, how we retain, and then it became diversity. And then it became diversity and inclusion. Then it became diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then it became DEIB, which was diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And you've probably seen all of these other different acronyms for it. So I've seen like JEDI and, all these different things. But, it seems like there's a debate now about equality versus equity in the companies that are dropping that E from their practices. But, for me, it's always been at the core of what I've done, no matter what industry. And when I first got into diversity, I did not feel like I had a voice or a seat at the table, or however you want to phrase that, because the position typically was not autonomous. It reported into head of HR, or it reported into a COO or some other position, or was part of supplier diversity. And as I started to see that, then I said, well, how am I going to be able to keep doing this work, but make sure that it gets the respect and the voice that it needs in order to make an impact and make a difference? And since I was in that recruitment space, I said, I think that being a head of HR is going to give me that opportunity because it is very interwoven into everything that a company would do, and it has the ear of the CEO. Um, and that's kind of how my career evolved. It went from being a head of diversity to being a head of HR to now owning my own company where I intertwine both of them. And People Experts is the name of my company, but it really focuses on people and culture. And that's how I feel that I am making an impact with various companies in different industries, where it's ensuring that they are starting out on the right foot when they're creating their diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, as well as having their first HR leader hired to their company.
Mm. It sounds like it's been a bold journey because it's always requiring you to be a catalyst for change. Especially during times when you have to explain what the change is, which is what's happening now, right? To your point, this really began as a compliance initiative, and it's evolved to a more people-centered initiative, although it's it's one that's very contentious because not everyone understands what that's like.
Yeah, and I would, I think when you think in terms of, organizational structure, or you're thinking of organizational development, then this becomes change management. Because if you um, want to change a culture to make it more human or people focused, then that not only requires training, but it requires a change in mindset. And so, what I've had to do is really create the business case of why this is important, and why it's important to do business with varying cultures, communities, and how do you tap into those various markets, but understand that you also need the voice of those people in order to be successful in those markets. And no matter what it's been, I've worked with tech companies, I've worked with um, architect and design companies, nonprofits, private equity companies, and it's really, there's that opportunity in each one of those industries and sectors where it really takes understanding the market in order to tap into it. But also, you're creating an environment and a culture uh, for your staff and your teams to really understand the value of having those voices, in not only in the company but outside of the company, and how that just contributes to a growth mindset.
Great point. And to that end, I want you to share with the audience what was that moment where you pivoted with purpose, where you made that bold choice that really changed everything for you?
I would, for me, it was because there were a couple of them. I mean, and this was prior to me starting my own company, but it really, I'll say that pivoting from DEI to a head of HR, um, was when I had already kind of come into an organization. I had built a DEI council. I had completed the company's first DEI report. Um, and then there was still no changes on the recruitment end. And I will say this was a national law firm that I worked for at one point, and they only recruited from the top schools. So you had to be in the top 10%, or whatever that percentage was, but it was definitely top 10%. And when you think about that, there was not very many people of color in that category or in that percentage. So even though we had created the council and we had the reporting, and for the most part, the firm understood why it was important, you still weren't bringing in the right people. And it was because there were these other parameters that had been put in place that were creating inequity. And so then I said, well, how do I change that? Because that's really where the issue is. And that's what really made me pivot to being a head of HR, because at the time my position reported into the head of HR. And that's where the change really needed to be made. And so once I made that change, then I knew that I could have more input into how we hired, where we hired, um, the hiring process to make sure that that was unbiased, and also made sure that we had, diverse people, backgrounds, ages throughout the organization at every level. And that's where I started to see the changes being made, where there, when you change the processes and the systems, that's when I could really make the impact. And I would say this at the second time that I pivoted, which was kind of out of a full-time role into creating my own company, was, when I saw myself kind of building these structures for other organizations, but not really feeling like I was being appreciated or that it was rewarding. And to some degree, it was kind of being lost in kind of other change management processes, or if the company went through a merger and acquisition. Um, and as you know, when that happens, all of the work that you've done can go out the window because it's merging with another company, and you're either taking on the culture of your company or the company that's acquiring you. And you're usually taking on the one that's acquiring you, which hopefully it's the same, but a lot of times, it's very different. And so you'll lose some of that. And then it just starts to feel that the work kind of goes out the window. And I felt like in creating my own company that I could make impact in multiple companies. So my clients, want my services, they need them, and they are of value because, they're, and I don't want to say that they're paying a higher price for them, but I think when a company is looking for a consultant, they're serious about the changes that need to be made in the organization, and they're willing to listen. And that's what I would find was missing when I was in full-time roles where I was told one thing when I was interviewing, and then once I got there, there really wasn't that buy-in or willingness to make the changes that were needed in order to grow the company or cultivate the workplace culture, and really bring in those DEI um, programming and initiatives, and really focus on retaining their staff. So those were probably the two biggest points in my life where I felt that I need to do something else in order to ensure that I'm truly making an impact.
Wow, I commend you. I mean, kudos. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to pivot, let alone pivot a few times, and with intention and action and impact, right? So I want to ask, what is one thing you would like our listeners to learn from you today?
I think that you can pivot at any time, and I think that people kind of get stuck, or they get complacent where they feel that if I make this change, there's no going back. And I think that you can always go back, but if you never move forward, then you'll never know what else is out there. And it actually creates roadblocks and fear of growth for me. If I hadn't taken the chance on myself to create the company or to move into a different industry, a different position, then I would have never known what I was capable of. And I think that it really prevents you from seeing your own growth, and it limits you to some degree as well.
It's like you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be committed to kind of starting with a clean slate every day because we see it now more and more. Everything's being disrupted by technology. And DEI is woven into that disruption, right? You mentioned the top 10 schools in recruiting earlier. Well, technology is disrupting the way you recruit for diverse talent, right? Because access is a big issue. We know that there is a certain population that doesn't have access to technology. How do we contend with that when we are recruiting for um, diverse talent?
I think when we think about AI in every industry, it's not only when you think about how it's going to affect technology, but the way that it's going to affect hiring is, yes, it's supposed to help eliminate bias, and it's supposed to select the best candidates despite race, age, gender. But then it's still going to take a subject matter expert to interview those individuals and to ensure that they have the skills, the background, the experience to actually do the job. And I think that it takes that subject matter expert to ask the right questions. And if you don't really have the knowledge or experience in that area or in that industry, then you're not going to know which questions to ask. I think that when we think about technology, yes, it can pick up keywords. It can, select candidates through those keywords, and anyone can put anything on their resume. But when it comes to having to take action or answer questions, then that's where you're going to have to be able to give immediate answers, and only those that truly have the knowledge and experience will be able to do that. So you're still going to need those subject matter experts, but they're going to have to learn how to embrace AI and technology to be able to streamline processes, to work smarter and not harder, but still, be able to ask the right questions and, look for the right candidates when it comes to recruitment. And this will vary throughout industry, but in terms of recruitment, I think you're always going to need recruiters to ask the right questions.
You cannot, at least as far as I can see, you cannot replace humans. You cannot. You cannot. And as long as humans are around, there will always be bias, but it can be managed with skills.
Right.
So to your point, you always need the subject matter expert. Well, thank you, Alberta, so much for being here with us today. Everyone you can follow the information in the description where you can connect with Alberta, and you'll learn more from her, as I have for as long as I've known her. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Great talking with you, Loren.
Likewise.